Hello from aquaticplants.org and welcome to this new video. Today, we're going to take a look at how to clean your pond at the start of spring. We'll talk about what you might notice in the pond during this time of year, the small, typical seasonal issues and how to address them, and we'll also go over how to prune and care for the main types of aquatic plants so your pond is ready for a season full of flowers and lush vegetation. At the end of winter, your pond might look quite bare. This is completely normal, as aquatic plants go into dormancy during the colder months. Water lilies, for instance, may have very few leaves or none at all, depending on your climate. Submerged plants might seem to have disappeared entirely, and most marsh plants appear dry above the surface. During this season, the pond water may also look murky or brown. That's because aquatic plants slow down their purifying activity in cold temperatures, so everything tends to stagnate a bit. In our case, the problem is made worse by dirt roads near the ponds. When it rains, some of that dirt washes into the water, making it even cloudier. As soon as the weather starts warming up, you might notice foamy bubbles on the surface of the water. These bubbles are actually gases released from decomposing leaves that settled on the pond bottom in the fall. Another common thing to see is the growth of string algae, especially in shallow areas or around decaying marsh plant debris. That's because the organic matter from decaying leaves feeds algae growth. Also, in early spring, aquatic plants are still dormant, while algae are quick to wake up with the first rise in temperature. You can remove the algae with a net while waiting for your aquatic plants to fully come back to life and resume their water purifying role. If you have fish, they'll have spent the winter hiding at the bottom of the pond in a sort of hibernation. It's normal not to see them, and there's no need to feed them. Once temperatures begin to rise, they'll start moving again and come up to the surface. That's when you can start feeding them again. Now, let's look at the main types of aquatic plants and how to take care of them as spring begins. Let's start with the submerged plants. You might be wondering where they've gone, since you can't see them anymore. Don't worry, they are still there, just settled into the silt at the bottom. Once it gets warmer, they'll start growing again. If you're curious, you can gently rake the bottom to check for them, but don't remove them. It's just to confirm they are still alive. If your pond bottom is covered in fallen leaves, maybe because it's near trees, it's a good idea to remove them with a rake. Just be careful not to pull up the submerged plants in the process. This issue can be prevented in autumn by collecting leaves before they sink, or by placing a net over the pond. Let's move on to marsh plants. Except for a few varieties that retain greenery in winter, like Hippuris vulgaris, most marsh plants look completely dry above the waterline. In these cases, trim the dry parts down to water level. You can use scissors if you only have a few plants in a small pond, or a hedge trimmer for larger setups. Make sure to collect all the trimmed material. Don't let it sink and decompose, as that can lead to more algae problems later. Marsh plants also tend to spread over time, often growing out of their containers, whether they are in microperforated baskets or standard pots. That's just typical aquatic plant behavior. I recommend removing anything that's grown out of the container, rhizomes, new offshoots, and even roots if you'd like, since new ones will grow back in warmer weather. Some marsh plants also send out stolons or surface runners. If space is limited, prune them back to keep the plant roughly within container size. Here I'm showing you how to prune a marsh plant in a small nursery pot, but the same process applies to any pot size. I'm cutting away last year's dry stems, removing rhizomes that have grown outside the pot, and trimming back any branches that are spreading out too far. Another thing to watch for: some marsh plants can drop seeds and you may find surprise seedlings growing in other pots. Remove these before they take over. The same thing applies to weeds that can pop up from moist soil plants or from marsh plants planted too close to the surface. As for water lilies, if you want, you can remove rotten leaves and old flowers from last season, being careful not to remove submerged plants as well. Is it absolutely necessary? Not really. Once those parts settle on the bottom, they decompose and act as fertilizer for the water lilies and submerged plants. However, too much of it can encourage algae growth. In our case, we don't do much work on the water lilies. We're short on time, but thanks to the dense growth of submerged plants in our ponds, we don't have any issues. Regarding lotus flowers, this is the right time to cut off any dry parts sticking out of the water. This is especially important to do in early spring, not in late summer or autumn, because that's when lotus plants develop rhizomes for the following year. Pruning in autumn could damage or even kill the plant. However, pruning water lilies and marsh plants can also be done easily in autumn. You can use scissors or a hedge trimmer for this task, then gather and remove all the cut material. It is also important to eliminate the seed capsules. In fact, lotus flower seeds sometimes germinate, perhaps 1 in 100, and you could end up with a lotus that is different from the one you bought, growing from a seed in the same tub. In fact, lotuses born from seeds are not the same as the mother plant. For example, if you have a pink lotus with many petals, you could end up with a yellow lotus with few petals. That's why lotus plants are propagated by dividing the rhizomes, not from seed. An important job to do in spring is fertilizing aquatic plants. Water lilies or marsh plants that produced few flowers or small leaves last year should be fertilized now. Not all plants, however, need fertilizer this season. In fact, those that were thriving last year can wait. You can fertilize them later in the season if they show signs of weakness. The Osmocote tablet fertilizer, with its slow release over 8 to 9 months, allows you to obtain abundant flowering from spring through early autumn. Lotus flowers are an exception. They absolutely need fertilizing in spring. These are demanding plants, and without adequate nutrients, they'll produce little vegetation and very few flowers. Lotus rhizomes grow at the bottom of the tub, especially along the edge. So, when fertilizing, try tilting the pot slightly to push the tablets down as far as possible, right along the edges. If you want to check the condition of the rhizomes, you almost need to turn the pot upside down. If you find a lotus tub full of old, rotting rhizomes from the past 2 or 3 years, with little soil left, mostly replaced by dead roots and rhizomes, and the new rhizomes are thin and weak, it's best to remove the still healthy ones and completely repot the lotus with fresh soil and fertilizer. Even for water lilies and marsh plants, if the plant has completely grown out of the pot, and the remaining part inside is small and in poor condition, consider dividing and repotting it in a new container. In a large pond, this operation is rarely done, but in small ponds or mini ponds, such as an 80 centimeter diameter tub, repotting should be done more frequently, along with more regular pruning. One last important task is monitoring your water parameters using test strips like those from Tetra. The ideal pH for a pond is between 7.2 and 7.6, a range where aquatic plants thrive and algae is less likely to spread. Keep an eye on carbonate hardness and total hardness as well. High levels can encourage algae growth and even harm your plants. If the water you use to top up the pond is too hard, consider using rainwater if possible. If the water parameters are too high, you can find pH- on our website, a sodium bisulfate-based solution that helps reduce both pH and carbonate hardness. You can also add acid peat in mesh bags anchored to the bottom, otherwise they'll float. Acid peat binds minerals in the water, helping reduce both total and carbonate hardness, and also lowering the pH. One more small but important detail. If you're near the sea, avoid topping up your pond with water from a well that's very close to the coast, as it could contain salt. Pond plants are freshwater species and don't tolerate salt. Keep in mind that sodium isn't detected by standard water tests. You'd need a salinity meter to check for it specifically. Monitoring water parameters is especially important if you have fish, as it can help prevent serious issues, like finding your fish gasping at the surface and eventually dying. This problem can be caused by an accumulation of rotten leaves on the bottom, combined with an excessive presence of fish waste and uneaten food, which produce ammonium. If the pH of the water is high, especially above 8, ammonium tends to more easily transform into ammonia, a gas very dangerous for the health of fish. So, even more so if you have fish, it is essential to combine cleaning the pond with checking the water parameters. Finally, early spring is the perfect time to introduce new aquatic plants of all types: water lilies, marsh plants, and submerged plants. If you want to add a lotus flower to your pond, or create a mini pond with lotus, spring is the obligatory period to do it, especially between March and May. Lotus flowers are spectacular. They add an exotic touch to your pond, with large, elevated leaves and striking blooms that rise above the foliage. On our website aquaticplants.org, you'll find all the plants we mentioned, as well as Osmocote fertilizer tablets and baskets for potting or repotting. See you soon in a new video. Bye.